Welcome to With All My Heart, a podcast hosted by Joanna Coburnett, pastor's wife at Victory Baptist Church in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. This podcast is designed to help ladies of all ages with the principles of the Word of God. In this podcast, we will explore what it means to love God with all our hearts. Through Bible lessons, we will discover how to deepen our relationship with the Lord and experience His love in a more personal way. As we journey together, let's open our hearts to the unchanging truths of God's Word.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another week of With All My Heart. And I always look forward to these times together, and I'm always honored, of course, that you listen in and that you take the time to join me. I hope that you will, if in case I forget to say it later, please join in next week. Grace Johnson, our youth pastor's wife, will be speaking, and Grace is a very dear friend of mine and is always such a great encouragement. And I know that you will be encouraged by her words and her thoughts that the Lord gives her. So please plan on that. As always, on the last Fridays of each month, we have one of our pastoral staff wives that bring the lesson, and they always do a great job. I hope you'll plan to join us tomorrow for our harvest party at the school property, and you are invited. If you're local and you're from around here, we want you to come. There is no charge. There will be hot dogs and hamburgers and chips provided, and then we will also have food trucks that if you want to buy some desserts, that they will be there as well. I think we're going to have ice cream, and then there's another one with all sorts of the good fried, I think, Oreos and pretzels and all of those things. So please come. It's always a great time. We have the bounce houses for the kids, and it's just fun to see them running all over the school property, just playing and having a great time. Of course, our church family enjoys it, and then many from the community come, and so it's a great outreach as well. So I hope you'll plan to be with us. We're going to jump right into our lesson, our devotional for today, and it is in Genesis chapter number 29. And it is the story of two sisters, Rachel and Leah. And I have to tell you that I had a hard time preparing a lesson for this, because when I was first reading through it, and I told my husband, I said, it's hard to see a lot of good that is in the story of Rachel and Leah. But I kept reading back through it, and I kept asking the Lord to show me what He wanted me to learn from it, and He did. And I gleaned several things that I feel like that I need to apply to my own life, and perhaps there might be some thoughts that you could take that you could apply to yours as well. But you know, I think maybe it's our American culture, and maybe growing up on the princess stories and the happily ever afters and the fairy tales, we all like stories that end happy. We all like stories that have happy, even just happiness in them. I don't know about you, but I really don't like to read sad things. I don't like to watch sad things very much. Thus, that's why this time of year is favorite in our house. We love the Hallmark Christmases and the Hallmark fall movies. We love those things. We love the feel-good movies, and I think a lot of you are like me too. But you know what the honest truth is? So many of us, as I thought about this story, and as I read through the story, and I saw two sisters that were trapped in a sad situation. And to be honest, both of them were truly the victims of this situation. It was out of their control, especially as you consider the culture of the Old Testament times. It was out of their control, and they were trapped in an impossible situation. But as I began to think about it, I thought, is that really so different than a lot of situations that we have in our world today? The older I get and the more ladies that I counsel, and the more people that come to my husband for counsel and guidance, and the more stories we hear about, you all have a lot of hard things in your life. You have a lot of hardships. You have a lot of things that you can't just make disappear. You can't just change a few things and all of a sudden the whole situation is better. And as I read this story, I thought, is it really so different than a lot of the things that we face in our family relationships and our friend relationships? But the Lord gave me several thoughts, and I want to share with you today. This is a story, it's a sad story of these two sisters, Rachel and Leah, that were caught up in a situation that was unfair and not of their making. In Genesis chapter 29 and verse number 15, Laban is talking to Jacob. And we know, we heard last week how that Jacob tricked his brother out of his birthright. He tricked his brother out of his blessing. He lied to his father. His mother was his counselor. Rebekah was his counselor to deceive. And so now Esau is hating Jacob, and so Jacob flees. He leaves and he goes back to his father's or his mother's people. and he finds his uncle Laban, and that's where we are here. And he finds his uncle Laban. Well, Uncle Laban has two daughters. He has Rachel and he has Leah. And the Bible describes Leah as being tender-eyed. We don't know if that just meant that she was shy, that she didn't just have a spark in her eyes, but at the very least, she was not beautiful like what the Bible describes Rachel to be. Well, the Bible tells us, and for sake of time, I'm going to just paraphrase here. The Bible tells us that Jacob fell in love with Rachel, and he wanted to marry Rachel. And it says he came to Laban, and he said, "Let me have Rachel as a wife." And Laban said unto Jacob, "Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be?" And Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder, the oldest, was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter." Now, even that alone, that just sounds amazing to me, that he was willing to give 7 years of his life, with the exception of room and board, just for the privilege to marry Rachel. And so that's what he did. He worked for 7 years. And according to Old Testament custom, he went to get married. Well, in those days, the bride was covered with a veil. The ceremony was held at night. And Jacob married, he thought, Rachel. But the next morning when he woke up, he was not married to Rachel. He was married to Leah. And he was very upset because Laban, his father, had tricked him. Time out. What does that remind you of? Just a couple chapters before, I'm reading about Jacob, who was in the tent with his father, Isaac, tricking him out of the blessing that was intended for his brother. Isn't it amazing that we will reap what we sow? And so Jacob went to Laban. He said, "You have deceived me." He said, "I still want to marry Rachel." And Laban said, "All right, well, if you want Rachel, you're going to have to work another 7 years for her." And that's what he did. And then he married Rachel. And so that's how this home got its start. Two sisters were married to one man. And that man loved Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel. He did not love Leah. The Bible tells us that Leah was hated. So I had several thoughts as I read through this. I thought, first of all, how amazing it is that we will reap what we sow in life. We've talked about this last week, but Jacob was a deceiver. Jacob was a manipulator. Even later on in this story, as I read about Jacob's time in Laban's house, and Jacob manipulated. But you know, Jacob reaped it in his own life. And Jacob created turmoil in the lives of others with his own deceitfulness, but the deceitfulness that he reaped in his life was devastating to his marriage. Later on, it was devastating to his sons, and he paid the price for that. We are going to reap what we sow. I saw this. I saw just the reminder that other lives and futures are damaged and destroyed by our actions. You know, when Jacob came to Laban, he said, "Why did you give me Leah and not Rachel?" And Laban said, "Well, it's the custom that the older one is supposed to be married before the younger one." And I don't know how that happened. I don't know if he had to confine Rachel to a room to keep her from telling Jacob, "You're marrying the wrong girl." I don't know if he had to force Leah, but definitely in that culture, women did not have the voice that they do today. Women were not able to speak up and to speak out, and they were just really sometimes just pawns in the hands of their fathers and their husbands. Leah and Rachel were both innocent, and their lives were damaged and destroyed, and their futures forever changed by the actions of someone else. And we're going to talk about how their reactions determine their future and how they reacted to it. But I just, as a cautionary, I want to warn us today, so many of us, we make decisions, maybe in leaving a marriage, maybe who we marry in the first place. We make decisions in our lives, sinful choices. So often my husband and I will be talking with someone, and I'm crying inside. And I'm thinking, if we could just rewind time, and we could just go back and you could make a different choice. So many innocent lives are affected by the choices that you've made. But sometimes our sinful choices, our selfish choices, they set a process in motion that we cannot stop. While we're in the middle of those choices, let's stop and let's think about that it's not going to just affect us. It's going to affect others. So here we have Leah and we have Rachel, and they are both trapped in this marriage now. You know, they were sisters, and they both had been done wrong. Neither one of them were responsible for what had happened to them. But I see that what happened next was one of them responded one way and one responded another. And I was challenged in my own life that as I find myself in situations that I don't like, that I can't change, my response to it and how I deal with it does matter. I see that Leah, as I read through, and it tells a story about how Leah began to bear sons. Even though she was hated by her husband, she was hated by her sister. She was continually, as you read the story, there was times where she was continually slighted, and Rachel was always favored over Leah. Leah had a sad, hard life. But God heard, and that's my first point, the Lord loved and heard Leah. God heard Leah, and it says he opened her womb and he gave her sons. He gave her many sons. And each time with those sons being born, we see Leah seeking the Lord. We see Leah looking for the Lord. And the first thought that I had through this is that when we keep seeking the Lord and we keep crying out to him, even in our hard times, the Lord will hear us and he can work things out. It may not be the way we would choose. It may not be in changing our situation. Leah stayed married to Jacob. Leah had to still have her sister that she shared her husband with, that she really felt like she lost her husband to. So her situation didn't change. But I believe that as we read through the story here, we can find that in the middle of all this, that Leah came to the point of accepting and making peace and even finding a joy in the middle of that situation. I see that Rachel was unreasonable and bitter and jealous. You know, there were many injustices done to both Leah and Rachel. But Rachel lost sight of who the real, I don't want to call them really an enemy, but who the real perpetrator was. The person that set all this in motion was Laban. And then Jacob perpetuated it. He's the one that continued and said, well, I'm still going to marry Rachel anyway. And then even after the marriage, he favored Rachel over Leah. But do you know who Rachel made the enemy? She talked about my enemy was her sister. She talked about how that she envied Leah. And I was reminded that sometimes that when we're caught up in an unfair situation, that if we're not careful, we're going to lose sight of who really created the problem. And we're going to blame the innocent, and that things never work out that way. I wrote this down. People that are jealous and bitter, they're unreasonable. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, the heart knoweth its own bitterness, and a stranger doth not intermeddle with its joy. And I have seen in my own life and watching others and other relationships that a jealous person is not reasonable, they're not rational, and they're bitter. And that bitterness will overtake them. A person is not your enemy just because they have something that you want. Rachel was favored. She was beautiful. She had anything she wanted from Jacob. By context, Rachel was loved. Leah had one thing. Leah had children, and Rachel did not. And yet Rachel blamed Leah. Rachel envied Leah. Rachel was mad at Leah. Well, that wasn't Leah's fault. Leah was just as much, if not more so, a victim of the same situation Rachel was. But Rachel made her the enemy. A person is not your enemy just because they have something that you want. A person is not your enemy just because they have not suffered in the way that you have. And you know, I see this happen over and over again. And I can relate. You've heard me mention before, I had 9 years of not having children. And sure, the devil tempted me to be angry at those that were able to have children, but they weren't the enemy. That just because God was blessing them didn't mean that I should be angry at them. But you know, we live in such a culture that is so entitled, and we think that no one else should be celebrating. If we're not married, but someone else is, then we're not happy for them. If we don't have children and someone else does, we're not happy for them. Maybe other people have grandchildren and we don't. But we've become such a society that is so selfish and so self-centered that just because someone has something we don't have, or someone else is not suffering in ways that we are, they become the enemy. And when we do that, we are going to have bitter hearts, and we're going to destroy the relationships that we do have. The next time that you find yourself resenting someone or angry at someone, ask yourself if they have intentionally wronged you. If they have, then figure out ways to take steps to work through it. But if you can't point to an unresolved issue based upon an intentional action, you might need to examine your own heart for envy and jealousy and bitterness. In this case, Rachel resented Leah because she had sons and she was a victim of the same injustice that she herself was. And as I already mentioned, she lost sight of who the real enemy was. We all have difficult situations in life. All of us, every single one of us. But how we process them and how we deal with them, it will determine how we can move forward in life. So here's just kind of a few thoughts. Break down the wrong situation that's impacting you. Figure out who actually did the wrong. Acknowledge that it was wrong. Maybe you need to go to an altar at church. Maybe you need to kneel in your own home. And you need to just say, Lord, they were wrong in the way they treated me. But I'm not going to hang on to that wrong. I'm going to give that wrong back to you. Acknowledge the injustice. Intentionally, on purpose, forgive them. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you. Set boundaries that are healthy. I don't think that forgiveness means that you open the doors up to allow that same injustice, that same wrong to be done again. Realize who is also the innocent victim or bystander, and do not blame people that have what you don't or that haven't suffered the way you have for the problems you have. And then this, do not expect others to give you what God alone can. You know, Rachel got to the point, and this is kind of going on into the next thing, Rachel's bitter, selfish spirit destroyed even the relationships with the people that she did have. She had a sister that was there. They could have been companions through this, but she destroyed that relationship with that sister. She even damaged her own marriage. The Bible talks about how she came to Jacob and she said, give me children or I'm going to die. And Jacob's anger was kindled and he said, am I God? Can I give you children? But Rachel became so unreasonable. A bitter, selfish spirit will make you be unreasonable, and it will destroy the relationships that you do have. Rachel was selfish and unkind, and she was unhappy. She was the one that was loved. She was the one that was beautiful. She was the one that was favored continuously. But because she didn't have what she wanted, she had a bitter, ungrateful, unselfish, unhappy spirit. But I find that Leah was blessed even though life was very hard. I really think that Leah had a sad life. I don't know that Leah was truly ever had true happiness in her life, but I do believe that as we read through, that I believe that Leah found a contentment, she found a purpose, she found a joy in her life, even in the middle of a very sad, very hard time. And I love it that the Lord still hears us in the middle of messes that sometimes are of our own making, or maybe they're not of our own making. The Lord still hears us. And He can work in ways that we would never have dreamed of. And maybe it won't be the answers to prayer that we ask for, but He can work and He can still give us a peace and a contentment in our heart. I see a self-centered life is always an unhappy life. I hope you are listening. I hope you're teaching this to our children. I am so burdened as I get older. As I mentioned, our whole culture, our whole society is so centered on what makes me happy and what can I get for me. And I promise you, we will never be happy. We will never have joy as long as we are self-centered. A jealous spirit is always, always unreasonable. It cannot be pacified. It cannot be given enough because there will always be someone. I'm so thankful for a mother. I remember her telling us this. She said, children, there will always be someone who has more in any area than you do. There will always be someone who can do anything that you try to do. There will always be someone who can do it better. And you know what my mom was telling us is don't get jealous of people. Just focus on your life and what God's given you and the opportunities He's given you and do your best with that. And don't focus on others. A bitter spirit will always destroy relationships. And you know what I've seen? The bitter spirit that we have generally does not destroy the relationship with the person who did you wrong to start with. That relationship's already over. But if we harbor that bitterness in our heart, it's going to destroy the relationships with the people we have in our lives today. If I keep a bitter spirit in my heart, it will affect my marriage. It will affect my innocent children who had nothing to do with any of the wrongs ever done to me. We have to deal with a bitter spirit. The Bible warns us to beware lest any root of bitterness spring up and defile us. A person who keeps trusting the Lord, who keeps seeking for Him even in difficult times, will find joy, contentment, purpose, and fulfillment in unexpected places. You know, I love this, that God blessed Leah and He blessed her sons. I don't know that she ever knew this until she got to heaven, but God chose the sons of Levi through the tribe of Judah to carry on the Messianic line. I love that He chose the son Levi, his descendants, to carry on the priesthood, and they were the spiritual leaders of the children of Israel. God blessed Leah. Leah had a sad life, but she still found joy and purpose. Rachel had a selfish life, and she only made things worse. She only destroyed the relationships she did have. God always sees. I don't know what wrong you're suffering right now, but God sees it too. And He's still listening, and He's still watching. And He's waiting for us to cry out, even in the middle of those messes that maybe we've made and we can't get out of, or maybe someone else has made and now it's a life that impacts us. I think of so many children that have seen homes destroyed, and maybe they're grown up, but there's turmoil because their family unit is destroyed. God sees, God hears, and God can still work. Maybe you're trapped in a mess that is even of your own making. But I want to challenge you to guard your spirit, even in the midst of that mess. God will make a way. He's still listening, and He can bring peace. He can bring joy. He can bring contentment, even in the middle of things that we would say there is no hope for. Guard your heart. Seek the Lord. He saw what happened. He's listening, and He can work things out as only He can. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll take the time to read the chapters there at the end of Genesis 29 and 30. Read the story of Rachel and Leah, and ask the Lord to show you some things from their lives of how that you can apply them to your heart and your marriage and your relationships. And we can find peace and joy and contentment. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to being with you in 2 weeks. Please listen in next week. I know Grace will be a blessing. She always is. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you for listening to With All My Heart, a ladies' devotional podcast with Joanna Coburnett. We hope that you have been encouraged and challenged to deepen your love for Christ and be more like Him today. God loves us, and we should love Him in return. Until next time, keep seeking Him with all your heart.